Today we're going to begin to look at the second group of the festivals. For the past week, we've been looking at God's holy days. We looked at Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and then we finished with Pentecost. And those are the spring feasts. Those are the ones that Jesus fulfilled at his first coming. Now what's awesome is that Jesus didn't fulfill them in or around the day. It wasn't close or just on the exact day. Remember, 4 days before Passover, the lamb was to be carried in. That's when Jesus came in through the eastern gate. As we look at all of those first 4 festivals, we see that he fulfilled them on their actual days, the days that the Jews were expecting the Messiah to do those things. So now as we shift focus and we look to the final 3, we're going to look at the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. As we look at those are the prophetic ones. Those are the ones that are yet to be fulfilled. They are to be fulfilled at the second coming. Now, this whole week, the theme is hope. We have hope already in that he has secured our salvation. He did everything required for salvation. But now we can have hope that he's coming back for us. Not only is he coming back for us, he's coming back for us as his bride. Now, I don't know about some of the men who are watching the show today. When I grew up in the church, hearing about, being called the bride of Christ, that never really sat too well with me. I wondered, what does that mean for me as a man to be the bride of Christ? Well, we have to understand what that meant in that culture. That term obviously comes from a wedding ceremony. And in a wedding ceremony from the first century, we look at some of the things that were done, and we see answers that Jesus gives about the end times. And as we parallel the two, it's amazing to see how close they are. Now, the problem is that when we hear about being the bride of Christ, our 21st century mind thinks of what a wedding is like today. And we can't do it like that, friends. The weddings and the focuses were completely reversed. Today in the 21st century, the bride is basically the star of the show. Everything focuses on her. She walks in the room, everybody stands up and looks at her. She's the focus. She does all the planning. But if you go back to the Bible times, things were completely different. You know what the bride did? She showed up to the wedding. It was the groom who did all the work. He did all of the preparation. He did all of the planning. Everything was on him. And so when we're called the bride of Christ, we need to understand what's our role as the bride and what was his role as the groom. And we know that he will be faithful to complete everything, all of the requirements of the groom. Well, let's look at what's called a betrothal process. We look and we see how a wedding was done in the first century, and I'll give it to you in steps. And then we're going to look over here and see, how did Jesus respond to that? What did he do? Did he fulfill his role as the groom? And again, we have great hope knowing that he will fulfill all that's required of him. Now today, in many cases, when you want to get married, the man approaches the father of the bride, asks for the hand in marriage. He says yes, and then they move on. It was a lot more complicated in the first century. In fact, it was a lot more involved. There was a lot more stages and steps. Marriages were very, very serious. And the first thing that would happen is that the man would come to the village where the woman lived, and she would meet with the father, and he would present to the dad a covenant. He would establish a covenant with the father saying, this is how I will provide for your daughter. I will do this and I will do that. I will take care of her. And once the father was okay with the covenant and he said, you know what, he's a good guy, he comes from a good family, he's going to take care of her, they would move to the second stage, which was paying the price for the bride, or the price, because it wasn't enough just to establish a covenant, but now you had to set a price. How much did you love this woman? How high of a price were you willing to pay? And so the man would make an offer. And guys, you didn't want to lowball it. You wanted to make sure you gave the best price possible. And so once the price was established, you move on to the next stage. Now think about Jesus. He's having this final supper, this final Passover with his disciples. And he says to them, I have come to what? To establish a new covenant with you. And then he says, I've come to pay a price for you. What kind of a price did Jesus pay? How high was he willing to go? He says, greater love has no man than he who lays down his life. And so Jesus, just like the man in the natural, he came to establish a covenant. And then more than that, he offered to pay the price for the bride, the highest price, which was his life. Now the next stage in the betrothal is they've accepted the covenant, they've accepted the price. Now the father would go into a room where his daughter was sitting. Now remember, I've studied this. I've looked at documents from the first century and saw how weddings were done in that time period. And it's remarkable to see the striking parallels. The father would go into the room where the daughter was, and he would say, okay, all is prepared. I've accepted the covenant. We've agreed on the price. And what would happen is the dad would leave the room. The daughter had prepared a meal that she was going to eat with her potential husband. She would get up from the table and go to the door, and she would open it. She would come back down and sit. Now, she would only open it part way. They couldn't even see each other. And when the man saw the door being opened, only when the door was opened, what would happen is he would come and he would knock. The woman would hear, and then she would get up and go. And when he saw the door being opened, he would wait, she would sit, she would prepare, and he would come into the room. They would sit down together and they would eat a meal. Now, many of you, you're already going ahead in your minds. Where are you going? Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. What did Jesus say? He said, behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And if anyone hear my voice and open that door, I will come in, sit down with them, and sup with them. Are you starting to see the parallels so far? Well, the next stage is that the man would pour a glass of wine for the woman, and he would offer her the cup. She would take the cup and she would drink it. And the moment she drank the cup, the wedding was sealed. The betrothal was sealed. They were legally married. And she would pass the cup back to him, and then he would drink it, and then that would seal the deal. Again, think back to Jesus in that final Passover meal. And he pours the glass of wine, and he says, each of you, take this cup and drink of it. Why did he do that? Because the groom had to offer the bride a cup. And as they took that cup and they drank that cup, this covenant, the betrothal between the groom and the bride began. And then people ask, when did Jesus drink the cup? Remember in the garden? He said, Father, if this cup can pass from me. And he said, no, I know I've got to drink the cup. I've got to pay the price. And as we skip ahead, we look to some of the other stages, and the groom now would leave the bride and he would go back to his father's house. And when he got there, he would begin to prepare a home for her. And he would go away for a minimum 12 months, up to 18 months, and he would build a home for his future bride. And his friends would come up to him and say, when are you going to go back and get your bride? It looks like everything's ready. And in those days, it wasn't up to the son. He did not have the authority to choose his day when he would go back for his bride. But only the father of the house had the authority. And if you asked him, when are you going to go to get your bride? He would say, I don't know the day, I don't know the time. You have to ask my father. And when they asked Jesus about the end times, saying, when will you do this and when will you do that? He gave such a good Jewish first century answer. He said, I don't know. The angels in heaven don't know. Only my Father in heaven knows. And then finally, the Father would give his blessing. He would say, everything is prepared, everything is ready. The groom and his friends would go back to the village of where the woman was waiting. And when he would get to the village, he would sound the shofar. He would blast it. And the woman who was inside her house would hear the sound of the trumpet. She had to be ready because she didn't know exactly when he was coming. When she heard the trumpet, she would get up. She would look and she would see her beloved. And when they confirmed that she was ready, they would open up the gate to the city. The groom would come in to the village. He would go part way into the village. He would take her by the arm. They would meet halfway, and then they would go back to the father's house. And then there they would have the wedding supper together. And the Bible says that in the last days, at the great trump, the Lord himself will descend on high. He will sound the shofar. And those who are alive will be what? Caught up to meet him in the air. And the final step was these wrinkles, these little pockets would be sewn into the clothing that were worn by the woman. And people ask, why is there a pocket there? Well, I don't know if you've been to some ethnic weddings. In my culture, the Portuguese culture, what happens is you pass around your shoe, and as you go around, you put money in that shoe to help pay for the wedding. And Jesus said, my bride is not going to have any wrinkles in her dress. There's no pockets. No money has to be paid. I've already paid the price. And again, that gives us hope. He accomplished everything at his first coming. We know he'll accomplish everything at his second coming.